I'm June Gruber, an associate professor of psychology at the University of Colorado Boulder and director of the Mental Health Expert Series. I'm delighted to be here today with Dr. James Gross, a professor of psychology at Stanford University, about his cutting-edge work on emotion regulation and its timely relevance to mental health. So thanks, James, for being with us here today.
It's my pleasure, Jen.
I want to start out by having you just share a little bit about the kinds of work you do and its relevance to mental health and wellness.
Thanks. Yeah. So my work, June, is focused on emotions, what they are, how they play out over time. And I'm particularly interested in whether emotions are helpful or harmful in a particular context for people. And if they determine that emotions are harmful or not useful, what they can do about it. And this brings us to obviously to the issue of emotion regulation. So that's been really a central theme of my work for more than 2 decades, trying to understand the processes that people can engage when they determine that an emotion either is or might be unhelpful to them. And in terms of its mental health relevance, honestly, I think of all of this work as being important to mental health if we define mental health very broadly, not just as the presence of frank psychopathology, but as the ability to love and to work and to interact successfully with other people. I think that emotions play just a crucial role, so that finding ways to help increase the prevalence of emotions that are helpful and to diminish or decrease the prevalence of emotions in our lives that are unhelpful, I think is really a key support of mental health, very broadly construed.
I couldn't agree with you more in terms of thinking about emotions as the kind of core of what helps us thrive emotionally or sometimes suffer, and just
Yeah.
that emotions are really central to our mental health. And I guess the question is, as really the pioneer of the field of emotion regulation, how did you go about getting started in this work?
I think I've always been interested in what makes people tick very generally. That's why I'm a psychologist. And I've been interested particularly in this sort of tension between, sometimes very productive tension between sort of reason and passion, as the philosopher might put it in the Western tradition. And as a philosophy undergraduate, I again and again kept finding myself interested in versions of this question. So when I decided to study psychology, I knew that a question in this space would be interesting to me. I had the good fortune of studying a little bit at Oxford and then joining Bob Levinson's lab at UC Berkeley, where he and I began to do some work building on some things he had done and others had done in this space, thinking about emotions, how they play out over time, and then how we can influence or regulate those. So that was sort of my start in graduate school. And people have very different career trajectories, but in my case, I've been centrally interested in this set of issues ever since I can remember. So I've just been pursuing those and have been really gratified to see the interest in this work sort of increase over time. So that's how I got started.
Wonderful. So in this career that was really kind of born and it stayed focused on emotion regulation, in the sort of diverse range of experiences you've had, what are some either frustrations or failures you've had along the way, and also successes that you've savored?
Yeah, well, let's start with the difficult parts, the bumps or failures. Lots of things there to say. Uh, in my very first year as a graduate student, one of my side projects was trying to develop a set of video materials cut from longer film clips that would elicit emotions. And the reason I wanted to do that was that I thought that if I could elicit emotions under controlled conditions, then I could study them experimentally in the laboratory. Many people had used films previously, but there really wasn't a standard set of film clips that were of the comparable length and that could elicit different emotions at different intensities. And I remember in my first semester as a graduate student floating this idea by my then advisor, Bob Levinson. And he thought that was reasonable, but then got a little concerned when he heard that I was interested in better understanding whether length of the clip mattered, whether having the sound on mattered, whether hearing a plot summary beforehand mattered, whether participant sex mattered, and then whether the emotion type mattered. And he cautioned me that, that's a lot of things to keep track of in a study. And I was undaunted and didn't benefit from his counsel probably as much as I should have. And launched this study and ran hundreds of participants through what ended up being a five-factor design. And as he had counseled, sort of caution, he was quite right to do so because over that winter break, I found myself tangled up in a five-way interaction. Everything interacted with everything else. And so I had a rather miserable holidays trying to sort that out. So that was a mini failure, I guess, to get me started. But luckily, he helped me get back on the road, and he and I eventually put that together as a piece that I think has been a little bit helpful for people in eliciting emotion since. But that's an example of an early failure. Plenty of others since then. But turning to successes, I think my greatest success, if you can count it as a success, is having had the opportunity to work with such wonderful students and colleagues over the years. I feel as though if there's any success here, it's finding ways of engaging some of the smartest and most talented people in the next generation and helping them see the importance of the work that one's doing by sharing one's passion for that work. And I have so much passion for this field of emotion and affective science more broadly that I think it's easy for me to communicate that to folks. And I've just had a wonderful time over the years working with these incredibly wonderful students, many of whom now, as you know, are well placed as professors and all over the world. So I don't know if that's really a success in the sense you mean, because I've had rather little to do with it, but it's been just such a pleasure to see everybody grow in this space and the interest that this field has attracted.
I think it's a wonderful example of a collective success, and just how wonderful your work lab has been in helping create the field and grow it, but also just how interconnected all of this work is.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and it's really well beyond any one person's lab. I mean, the collaborations that you and I have had and that others have had in the field, I think really speaks to the importance of, putting the problem first and building teams to solve these really, really pressing issues. And, no time, I think, has needed this advice and wisdom around emotions and emotion regulation more than now when we're faced, of course, with pandemic and growing inequalities across societies and racial injustice, structural racism, and all sorts of tensions in our society and in each of our individual lives, all of which give rise to high levels of negative emotion, diminished levels of positive emotion, and just a lot of hardship around mental health challenges.
I mean, and what you're saying leads me to ask you, and I think you just spoke to it, but as you think about the most important next steps for the field, what comes to mind for you? I mean, you highlighted some key themes just now about the world we're in, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of next steps that feel important to me at the moment. I think there are a lot of mysteries still, June, about how it is that emotions aren't working for people in their lives and what we can do about it. One great mystery is, when people are suffering from, let's say, severe anxiety, one might think that that's because they just aren't able to regulate their emotions in ways that others do. But in work that you know very well, we and others have found again and again that there's really this gap, and you and I have discussed this gap between a person's intact capacity to regulate his or her emotions and then a seeming inability to actually exercise that capacity in everyday life. And that's, I think, a huge target for further investigation, figuring out, well, where do things break down? Where are things difficult for people? And I think the other half of the challenge I would identify as an important next step is even after we have a map of what's going wrong and is difficult for people, we then need to think about, well, what are the interventions that we can build and apply at scale that will allow people to correct these difficulties and overcome some of these challenges so as to be better regulated, not just their own selves, but also as they help others regulate their own emotion, the others' emotions as well. So both regulation of the person's emotions and assistance in regulating others around them. So those are I think two of the challenges I see.
Yeah, challenges and opportunities. I
Yep.
mean, that's good. That's the reappraisal and it's the truth, you know?
Yes.
So the last question I had for you is just what advice might you have for those watching this interview today, maybe students or scholars or the public at large, who are interested in the field, maybe in getting involved in the field?
June, that's a great question. First of all, just a warm welcome to anyone who's watching this and who feels interested or inspired by either what I'm saying or what one of my colleagues is saying about this important field. I think to find an important problem that one can use as a vehicle for creating a meaningful life is one of the greatest gifts there is. To really find a project that's worthy of one's skills and talents and energies at whatever stage one is, whether that's one's just beginning or whether one's moving through one's career. I think there are always opportunities to benefit from, these targets, these things that we think are important. So I think advice would be in a values driven way to find opportunities to express whatever talents a person has, whether that's science and being a scientist, or whether it's just being in another career, but really paying attention to science and helping to combat some of the misinformation that's flying around through the application of critical thinking skills. All of those ways, I think, we can exercise our values in service of hopefully making the world, sort of a better place for all of us. So identify your values and find ways to kind of pursue those in a field that makes sense and gives your life meaning and passion. That's what I've tried to do. I'm trying to encourage my students to do and encourage everyone to do.
Well, thank you so much, James, for speaking with us today. It's always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, June. Take care.